Let's talk about Malaysia. It's a nation that's really caught at the crossroads of two massive global forces, a climate that's changing incredibly fast, and the large-scale movement of people. Now, this isn't just about one problem or the other. It's about how these two things are colliding, creating what you could call a compounding crisis that's straining the country from the inside out.
To really get a sense of the scale here, let's just start with a number: 6.1 billion ringgit. That was the estimated economic damage from what everyone was calling the once-in-a-century floods that slammed Malaysia between 2021 and 2022. It's just a staggering figure, and it points to a much, much deeper vulnerability.
But behind a big financial number like that, there's always a human one. Over 71,000 people, and we're talking about Malaysian citizens here, were forced out of their homes during that one single flood event. Just lives and whole communities uprooted by rising water. This displacement within the country, well, that's the first part of this crisis that we really need to wrap our heads around.
So yeah, we're talking about a nation's own people being displaced by an environmental disaster. This isn't some abstract future scenario. It is happening right now, and it's creating this rising tide of disruption from right inside Malaysia's own borders.
Here's the crucial takeaway from that. Those massive floods made it absolutely undeniable that extreme weather is the new normal. It's here. And when you look at the data for why people are forced to leave their homes inside Malaysia, one cause just towers above all the others: floods. This puts an incredible strain on host communities, who are, again, Malaysian citizens just trying to help their displaced neighbors.
Okay, so it is super important that we get our terms straight here, because it really matters. You have an internally displaced person, or an IDP. That's a citizen who has to run from their home but stays inside their own country. A refugee, on the other hand, has been forced to cross an international border to find safety. This distinction is absolutely key, because Malaysia is dealing with both at the exact same time.
And that brings us to the second layer of this crisis. On top of its own internal climate challenges, Malaysia has also become a major destination for refugees in Southeast Asia. This has created a refugee that is under immense and, frankly, growing pressure.
And the numbers here are pretty significant. We're talking about nearly 193,000 registered refugees and asylum seekers in the country. Now, this is not a small population. It represents a major humanitarian responsibility that existed long before those catastrophic floods even hit.
And if we look at where they're coming from, the story gets even clearer. The vast majority, we're talking nearly 90%, are from neighboring Myanmar. Now, that concentration presents some very specific challenges, everything from language and cultural integration to providing really tailored support.
And they aren't spread out evenly across the country either. Not at all. More than half of them are concentrated in just two urban areas, the state of Selangor and the capital city, Kuala Lumpur. Just think for a second about the pressure that puts on things like infrastructure, housing, and social services that are probably already stretched pretty thin.
Now, this concentration in the cities is made so much worse by the vulnerabilities they already face. Because they don't have a formal legal status, a lot of refugees are forced into precarious housing, and often that's in low-lying, flood-prone areas. They have very limited rights to work legally, and their access to basic things like healthcare is restricted. They are, for all intents and purposes, living on the margins.
And this right here really gets to the heart of the whole issue. The source material calls it a compounding crisis, and that is the perfect description. It's not just two separate problems happening at once. It's more like a feedback loop, where the climate change makes the strain on the refugee population worse, and that strain, in turn, makes dealing with the climate impacts harder.
So, when a disaster like a major flood hits those urban centers, who does it hit the hardest? Well, it's the people who are living in the most vulnerable housing, with the fewest resources to escape or recover. The climate crisis and the refugee crisis literally collide, and they devastate the very communities that are least able to withstand that kind of shock.
And the economic impact of this is so deeply personal. When you actually break down the losses from these floods, the single largest category, by a huge margin, is damage to living quarters, people's homes. That's a massive blow that hits everyone, sure, but for someone with no legal safety net, no savings, it is absolutely catastrophic.
Let's just zoom out for a moment, because this isn't a uniquely Malaysian problem. The entire ASEAN region is on the front lines grappling with this same intersection of climate and displacement, though, each country's handling it a little differently.
And this comparison is actually fascinating. You can see the Philippines really stands out, with strong policies on both refugee protection and climate action. Malaysia, by contrast, has a moderate climate policy, but its approach to refugees is described as ad hoc.
which basically means it's reactive. It lacks a formal, predictable legal structure. So while Malaysia is definitely making strides in building up its climate resilience, that comparison with the Philippines really shows what's possible when you have a strong legal foundation for refugee protection. A proactive, rights-based approach can build resilience for everyone, including and especially the most vulnerable.
Acknowledging the problem is, of course, the first step. So now let's look at the solutions. The path forward here isn't about one single policy. It's about collective action on a whole bunch of different fronts to build resilience for everyone involved.
The recommendations really fall into three pretty clear categories. First, we need stronger global action on climate change and more financial support for the nations that are most affected. Second, there needs to be deeper cooperation within ASEAN to create a shared game plan for this regional challenge. And third, direct support for community-level resilience, empowering the local groups who are actually on the ground doing the work.
And for Malaysia specifically, the crucial steps are pretty clear. Developing that formal legal framework for refugees is absolutely paramount. Creating a national register for its own internally displaced citizens would make giving aid so much more efficient. And of course, continued investment in climate adaptation, like better flood control, coupled with really strong partnerships between the government and the NGOs.
And this brings us to the final, and I think the most crucial question that Malaysia's situation really forces all of us to consider. As climate change continues to displace more and more people, both within their own countries and across borders, the fundamental choice we face is one of inclusion or exclusion. The challenge isn't just about managing a crisis, it's about defining what kind of world we actually want to build in response to it.